Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me live. My name is Jacqui Patton, and I am one of the co-founding directors over at Ducaru, based in Aberdeen in Scotland. Today, I'm excited to have Jacqui Patton with me. She is the owner of Blot Creative, based in Jersey. Hi, Jacqui. Good to have you on.
Hi, Kemi. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thanks so much. I have to say, everybody watching, I met Jacqui on Clubhouse. So you may have heard bits and bobs about Clubhouse on LinkedIn. We've met in a few rooms around leadership, PR, marketing, and she's a fantastic lady. And I thought she's got quite a lot of insights that I want you to hear. So Jacqui, I would love to start right at the beginning. So you're obviously in PR now. And you've obviously had some background that brought you to where you are today. So tell us a little bit about your career journey to where you are today.
So first off, I just want to say thanks for having me. And it's really exciting to see you, given that we've only ever heard each other's voices when we've had conversations before. So that's quite exciting. So yeah, as you said, I'm Jacqui. I'm the managing director of Blot Creative, which is a strategic marketing and communications agency based in the Channel Islands, but we work with clients all over the UK, Europe, and the US at the minute. So basically, wherever anyone is, we can help. What got me here? Wow, it's been a windy road. I am originally, so my family background, my dad was a musician professionally. So I originally trained to be an actress. That was what I thought I was going to do. Yeah, so I spent kind of my entire childhood and my teens completely immersed in the arts, went off to train with a view to working in theatres. And my big dream was that one day I would own a theatre company and a theatre. That's what I always wanted to do.
Amazing.
And I worked professionally for a little while. And then I kind of fell out of love with it. I didn't fall out of love with the theatre or with the arts, but with the day-to-day lifestyle of being a jobbing actor, it just wasn't for me. I have some friends that have done amazingly well in the industry and people that are working all the time, and it just wasn't what I wanted to do when I actually got to do it. So when you have got your only qualifications are your A-levels and a load of acting credits, it's quite hard to get a job. That's what I just got. And all of my teachers at school telling me I should have done a law degree were coming back to haunt me at this point. So I just did what everyone does in those situations. I did every job that came my way basically for a long time. And I also had the opportunity to live in lots of different countries while doing that. So I basically lived all over the place, did lots of random jobs. I've been a gas emergency services phone operator. So if your house was going to go, I'd be the one that answered the phone. I've sold diving courses. I've taught drama lessons for little kids. I've done it all. And then I fell into a job as a marketing assistant, really junior level job. I didn't really know anything about marketing or brand or any of that. And it was the first time I'd done a job where I was like, I get this. This makes sense to me. And actually all the training I'd had about telling stories, understanding your audience, being able to present a message really well, being able to understand how things land and how different people react to them, all started to make sense in a corporate environment. So that's kind of where I ended up. And then I ended up working in health and beauty and brand management and then trade marketing. And then as the head of comms for an offshore bank. So I just gradually worked through lots of different jobs. And after doing that for a chunk of time, I decided actually I really want to go out and create a business. And an agency made sense. I've always worked with lots of different agencies across the last kind of 10 years in the industry, but I've always been in-house. So I had a client's view of what I wanted an agency to be. So that's what we're creating.
Oh, amazing. So there's so much in there that I want to go into a little bit. So I know we were saying before we started live how you've moved around. So you're in Jersey right now, which you say the weather's absolutely amazing, and I can kind of see it I can see it in the background where the kind of sun seems to be coming in a little bit. And tell us a little bit, because you grew up in Jersey, then you left and you lived in a whole bunch of countries and you came back again. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Channel Islands. So Jersey, if you don't know, is a tiny little island just off the coast of France. It's a crown dependency. It's part of the UK. So it's lots of British people live here, but lots of people from all over the world live here. It's a really, really mixed population, and it's a real mix of industries. So people will know Jersey from Bergerac, which was like that famous TV show that everybody watched in like the 80s. but also for Jersey Royal potatoes and for Jersey milk and things like that. So agriculture was our original, agriculture and fishing were our original big industries. And you would have heard about the French fishing boats and all that was on the news recently with trying to turn the electric off in the Channel Islands. There's been a whole load of stuff going on with fishing down here recently. But then gradually over the years, Jersey's industries changed and lots of different people came to do different things. So my parents moved here in the 70s. My dad's Scottish, so I feel like we're kindred spirits because you're living up in Aberdeen. And yeah, lots of people work here for different reasons. And then I kind of left, obviously, to go and study. And then when I decided, I was living in the UK, and then when I decided actually I didn't want to go into acting, I was like, right, I'm going to go and have a bit of a jolly in some other places and see what I wanted to do. And I ended up living in Australia for a while, and then out in Latin America, in Mexico and Guatemala. I really wanted to become bilingual, so I went and studied in Guatemala because immersion is the fastest way to learn another language. That's what I discovered. And yeah, I was kind of out there, and then came back to the UK, and then decided to move home to the Channel Islands, which is something that a lot of people do. And my initial plan was 6 weeks. I thought, I'll come back, I'll have a nice summer, have a little reset, and then I'll go and sort myself out. And that's 6 years ago. So that plan obviously went really well.
You must have really liked it. It must have felt like home, right, when you came back. Did you feel like you were back at home? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a really nice lifestyle here. Like we were talking before we came live, there's, a lot of, one of the main industries here is finance. There's a lot of big corporate businesses here. Very similar to the city, right? Most of those businesses have offices in the Channel Islands. The difference here is that you don't have to do an hour-long commute to get home, and you can go to the beach after work. So it's quite an easy place to find that balance.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Amazing. For anyone watching now or watching later, if you'd like to put a comment, or you've got a question from anything that you've heard from Jacqui or myself, feel free to put that in the chat. I always love to hear from people. So you started this kind of PR and marketing agency, and I think over the last 18 months, we know there's been so much change. What have you found, especially with the kind of PR and communication aspect? What have you found that have been maybe the key obstacles for leaders who are looking to communicate to their employees, communicate to the public about what is going on within their business and how they are, kind of sailing through or overcoming what's been going on with the pandemic?
That's such a good question. I think that we need to break that down into two things, right? Because the pandemic did something for communications and marketing, is that it shone a light on how important it is. Lots of businesses who thought, I can get away with a monthly press release and we don't need to be on social media and we don't need to have a really snazzy website, suddenly couldn't have those events or meet in person or go and see people. So the reliance on other channels became really important. And also from an internal standpoint, so the way we talk to our teams, if you didn't have really strong internal communications in place, when all your teams suddenly are at home and you're not sat next to them in the office anymore, that became a really big issue for people. So I think the first thing is that it kind of shone a light on the fact that it was important. Yeah. And that meant that some businesses immediately understood, okay, we've got to keep this stuff that we do really well going. Yeah. And other businesses suddenly realized they didn't have those things in place, especially from an internal position. I think that when we think about marketing, we think about customer. We think about telling our story externally. And we think about talking to our team as something that the HR people deal with or the line managers deal with. But really strong strategic communications involves that messaging coming right the way through your business and having a plan and a consistent approach. And I think when we think about PR, which at its heart is all about reputation, building reputations, growing reputations, protecting reputations, your team can destroy your reputation. If you don't look after them, that is not good. And that comes back to haunt you. You've just got to look at all the stuff that's been going on with Goldman Sachs in the news and things, the things that come out when it isn't done well. Vice versa, if your team love what you do and they get it and they're bought in, they're going to be some of the biggest advocates for your business and your brand. So that suddenly became really important. I saw a number of businesses just turn off the tap on their marketing during the pandemic because, oh my God, are we going to be able to make any money? We need to cut costs. Let's slash the marketing budget. And there's this perception, isn't there? People weren't buying, therefore we'll turn the tap off. And I think that's a mistake. I think that, and obviously I'm going to say that because I work in marketing, but it's a mistake from a momentum perspective, because one of the keys to really great marketing is creating that momentum, creating that trust around your brand, and your audience understanding where you're going to be and that you're going to keep showing up for them. And when businesses just turn that tap off and they disappear, what happens is they leave a gap in the market for challenger brands and other businesses who are ready to be a bit scrappy and do things a little bit differently. And I think it's going to be really interesting in the next kind of 6 to 12 months when we see kind of where all the brands and businesses level out to in terms of customer perception, because some people will have just snuck in and thought, right, we're gonna get those eyeballs on our business while everyone else is sleeping on it.
Yeah. You raise a really good point, because we definitely found that over the last kind of 18 months, there were smaller businesses who doubled down on their communications and on their marketing and used it as an opportunity to, I suppose, level out or even overtake, in some cases, their larger competitors who were, in some cases bogged down with furlough or loss of contract, all this process. And so it will be interesting to see where everyone sort of lands in the next few months. Another thing we noticed, I suppose, as a leader myself, I noticed that communication had to be far more deliberate. I think you don't realize as a leader how you're communicating. If you're normally an extrovert or you're comfortable speaking to people, you just kind of go about your day to day and talk to employees you need to speak to about whatever it is, and you communicate, and it tends to be fine. You don't really see how the impact is really reflected within your business. But then something like a pandemic comes into play, and you have to be far more strategic. You can't just say anything. You can't just not repeat yourself. You don't say it just once, and you don't say it in one format. You have to, it's a far more deliberate act. So you're now more conscious about how you're communicating, how people receive what it is that you're saying, and whether you need to tweak that. And I think one of the pieces that I really wanted to touch on is how leaders are able to influence, right? Because you now had to, obviously you're not in the office with them, can't sort of go to their desk and go do that now, and whatever it is that you used to do before, you have to influence from afar. And communication is part of that. Can you talk us through some of the things that you saw leaders doing that worked, and maybe some stuff that didn't work so much in terms of communicating and influencing internally within their business?
Yeah, 100%. Before we dive into that, I just want to pick up on something you said. Strategy. We were talking before, we're going to talk about authenticity and PR. We're going to talk about authenticity. And we were laughing and saying that's a bit of a buzzword, like one of those words. And strategy is similar. People talk about being strategic, but talking about it and actually having a strategy that you execute are two very different things. And I think that especially when it comes to communications, if your communication strategy inside your business is talking to your team, not a strategy, is it? That's just stuff you do day to day. But that's how lots of businesses operated, because just as you say, rightly so, when things are fine, you don't worry about it. But what a lot of small businesses have realized, and when I say small, it could be businesses that are, less than 1,000 employees, say, who have grown. They get to a point, whether you're running, a corner shop or you're running a trust company, but you've grown over time, and then suddenly you've got loads of shops or you've got different jurisdictions. The pandemic switched this need for how you communicate. Really big businesses, I used to run comms for an offshore bank, they have to have very strategic, well-managed internal communications, because the scale of the organization is so big that no one would know what was going on if it wasn't somebody's job to support the leadership to share that message. So I think in a way, people have realized, oh goodness, we need to do something here. But the reality is internal communications is an incredibly nuanced discipline. So I just say, if you're a business who is thinking, this didn't work so well for us and we now have to address how we communicate internally, please do not try and make that a side of desk thing that someone in your business does. Go and find an expert that can help you with it, because otherwise you're going to end up in a load of palaver. So that was just a thing to add in. So I think that's really important. So you were saying, what have I seen people do well in terms of communication and influence? What have I seen not so well? So I don't think that anything happened during the pandemic that was unexpected. I think it just amplified things that were already happening. So if you're an organization where your leaders are transparent, where they tell you what's going on, where they're not afraid to be vulnerable and to share, actually, this has happened and we're not sure how it's going to work out, but when we know, we're going to come back to you, then that will have kept happening. But in organizations where it's the C-suite, shut the boardroom door, no one knows what's happening outside that room, we can't tell them we don't know because then that means we're not in charge. Suddenly that becomes an issue because Chinese whispers happen.
Yeah.
People fill in the blanks that you're not giving them. So I think when we're talking about, really great communication from a leadership perspective, people think it means sharing the message. But sometimes it means having the conversation that the message isn't ready yet and being transparent about that and being able to say, actually, guys, this is the pandemic and we don't know what's going to happen. And I think some businesses had those conversations in March, April last year. And then their teams are like, okay, they don't know what's happening. Neither do we. That's okay, though, because as soon as they know, they'll tell me.
Yeah.
When it doesn't work is when they say, well, this is happening. Give information that's a bit shady, everyone's a bit confused, goes away and rings their mate on Zoom and goes, God, what's happened, guys? Did John in HR said this is happening? What do you think? Chinese whispers, Chinese whispers. And then by the time the senior team do know what's happening and try and communicate that, it's too late because everyone's already made their mind up. So I think that that's probably one of the big things is that transparency. And that applies outside of businesses too. I think businesses who during the pandemic were really transparent about what they were doing, about how they were tackling it, about how they were getting through it, about the lessons they've learned, about the struggles and how that's changing how they think about how they support their clients. Because it doesn't have to be negative, does it? We've all learned lessons from the pandemic that have made our businesses better.
Absolutely. That's
where that authenticity piece comes in, which adds value to your brand. That's, there's loads of stats to say. I think it's something like 90% of customers reckon that transparency and authenticity makes them more likely to support a brand. So yeah, I think that's probably the big one for me in terms of influence, is getting those lines of communication going and then being really transparent about what you can and can't share and why.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that leaders really struggle with. And I remember when I worked in the corporate environment, you could see that strain, especially when, for instance, there needed to be some redundancies or something, and there was already rumor going through that there's going to be some kind of redundancy, but you can see the leaders are not sharing this information. Sometimes they're just avoiding the conversation, and the more they avoid it and don't address it at all, the more the rumor gets fed. And then you can just see that, and sometimes I understand that balance between being inspirational and always bringing good news. I feel like sometimes leaders think for them to be inspirational and to lead, that they always have to be bringing good news. And so if the news isn't good, they're not going to share it.
Yeah, and that's, the reality of crisis communications, whether that's managing a big scale redundancy or whether that's navigating a pandemic or whatever it is that's happening for you. You are not judged. Remember, we were talking about PR before being about reputation.
Yeah.
And actually, with all your communications, you're not judged on what's happening. You're judged on what you do about it. And that's a really important thing to bear in mind. If you have to make 10 people redundant, you have to make 10 people redundant. You're not judged on the redundancies. You're judged on how you manage the redundancies, how you manage the exit process, how you have those conversations, how empathetic your leadership are, what the packages look like. If you're, I was given an example when we do media training. If you run a business and one of your employees falls off a ladder and breaks his leg, you're not judged on the fact he fell off a ladder. You're judged on whether you make sure that the next time he's not going to fall off the ladder, or that you sent flowers to his wife to make sure he's all right, or that you followed up in the press and said, God, this is awful, isn't it? We should have had better health and safety processes. We're going to go and fix them.
Exactly.
It's about what you're always going to be judged on how you react, not necessarily on the act itself. So I think that you mentioned there about things like redundancies. And for me, it's about getting that timing really right as well. And again, this is why bigger organizations have internal communications teams, because that's their job, to sit down and think, okay, how are we going to manage this in a way that is empathetic and cares and aligns to our brand values and allows our leaders to have those conversations. But it's interesting what you say about sometimes people feel like unless it's good news, they can't be inspirational. I think in my years in this industry, something that I have learnt is that we make assumptions that all leaders are good communicators, and that's not true. It's a skill. And some people naturally are good communicators. Some people put a lot of effort into improving that skill. And some people either aren't interested or don't have it or are petrified of it. That's not always a prerequisite to end up leading a business. So, you know, if you're working in marketing or communications roles, actually we have to have an awareness that sometimes we have to stop assuming that they're just going to get it as a leader. Yeah. We have to be able to support leaders to be able to do those things properly, like you would with anything else in your business.
Yeah, it's a really good point. For people just joined us, I've noticed a couple of people joined us on LinkedIn and also on Facebook. I'm talking to Jacqui Patton. She's the owner of Blot Creative, based in Jersey, and it is a sunny day over in Jersey. Actually, it's not too bad in Aberdeen, Scotland today, I have to say. So I think the sun is shining down on all of us this side of the world. Thanks for joining, and feel free to put comments and get in touch with us, ask your questions. So I want to get onto this authenticity bit, okay, because that's a word that is very much overused. I know what I mean when I say it. You know what you mean when you say it, Jacqui. So I thought we could start with defining what we mean when we talk about it in this conversation, and then talking about how leaders can bring that into their communication, and in particular PR, because I think sometimes PR does get that, well, not a bad name, but people just feel like if something is coming out as a press release, it may be exaggerated. It may not be 100% what's going on. It's, you know, it's designed to have certain optics and so on. And so I'm really interested in what you do around that. In fact, that's one of the things that attracted me to some of the conversations that you were having on Clubhouse, is how you bring that authenticity into PR so that people have this genuine feeling and have, you know, that trust and credibility built. So first of all, when you say authenticity, see, I can't even pronounce it.
I know, it's a hard one. And the more you say it, the more it kind of is hard to say.
Yeah, I should probably just stick to once. So I'll just say it once. So when you say authenticity, what do you mean, Jacqui?
So for me, authenticity is that feeling you get when you deal with a person or a business that you are seeing their true self. That's what it is for me. So if I think about brands that I think are authentic, it's brands where I think if I bumped into anyone that worked for them and asked them, oh, what's it like to work there? They'd be telling me the things that I assume from seeing the way they communicate externally. So it's that idea of like it being genuine and being, you know, what you see is what you get.
Yeah. I'm asking people that are watching, I'm putting it in the chat on LinkedIn in particular, what does authenticity mean to you? Because I like to know if you've got some thoughts around this sometimes overused word.
Buzzword, isn't it? And I think that's the thing. People, when we hear it a lot, it starts to not mean anything. But I obviously did a little bit of digging around this morning before our chat, because I thought I'll get some stats, because I think that's always interesting. So
great.
Social Media Today did a study with Stackler data, and they found that 90% of customers mentioned authenticity as an important factor in deciding what brands they like and support. So if you as a business are not thinking about if you're authentically showing up, then you're going to be missing out. The other research I found was that Forbes were looking at this, and especially in the Gen Z and millennial age groups, and like I think when we say that, everyone thinks, oh, 15-year-olds. That's not the case. I'm in my 30s. I am a millennial. So, you know, it's quite a wide-ranging group from teenagers to those kind of in their late 30s, which they were saying that they give preference to brands that are real and not perfect and well packaged. They're looking for that real feeling. And they also found that 2/3 of those respondents had an increase in positive feelings about a brand because of their association with a social cause. So this idea of like kind of aligning yourself with something that aligns to your brand values and being really open about that is also important for people. So I just thought those stats were interesting, because it's a buzzword, but it matters to your customers.
It matters a lot, yeah. We've got a great comment from David. Hi, David. He says, sometimes by simply saying I got it wrong or asking for help, that is definitely part of authenticity. So thank you for that, David. I think the past, obviously events that have just happened in the world, not just the pandemic, but the political landscape and a lot of the things that have been going on, the conversations that have been going on, mean that this is actually becoming far more important than it ever was before, where people want to see brands taking a stand, being part of the discussion around what's going on in society, in their community, and so on. So if it's something that a brand hasn't been getting involved in, or a leader hasn't really paid a lot of attention on this particular area for the last wee while, what are some of the things that they can start doing? What are some of the actions they can start taking to start showing that authenticity in the way they communicate, not just internally, but externally as well?
So I think David's point here about saying you got it wrong is probably one of the number one things. Because remember, we talked about you're not judged on what happens, you judge on your reaction to it. And we have to be really careful that those apologies or those, oh, goodness, that wasn't what I was expecting, but it's not gone how we wanted it to, guys, are also genuine. And that means it has to be followed by action. So if we're saying, oh, as a business, we did this thing before, and we've now looked at that and thought, oh, actually, that doesn't align with our brand values. It doesn't align with what we want to be doing in the business. If we had a chance to do it differently, we would. So this is what we're going to do, and having action to back it up. If a brand just says, oh, we supported this thing before, and then now we think that's not a good idea, so sorry about that, that's not very authentic, because they're not actually making any change. So I think that point by David kind of answers your question as well. That's really important. I think what you were saying about, there's obviously been so much stuff. There's so much political stuff going on. There's so many social justice causes, stuff happening that people feel like they need to talk about. And Black Lives Matter is a really good example of this. Last year, after George Floyd was murdered, so many brands that have never, ever talked about racial equality and just have teams of white people were suddenly on social media going, yeah, racial equality.
Exactly.
And that's not authentic. Now, it might be something that genuinely they think, oh goodness, now that this is coming to light, now that it's on our radar, now that we're seeing it, we realize we need to do something here. So that might be a genuine feeling, but it's that action that then you have to take a look at yourself and go, oh, hold on a minute. If that's something that we're really passionate about, how can we make sure our next event has really diverse speakers? How can we make sure that our recruitment policies mean that it's not all white men running our business? How can we make sure that actually we give some of our, profit that we want to give to charity to these causes? It's thinking about the actions that are going to back up the things you're saying. So I would say that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
Is if you're gonna back it, you've got to follow through and you've got to do what you say you're going to do. Rachel Hollis, who's a really big influencer in the US, has recently come unstuck with this. She's for years been building this massive business based around kind of being a working woman that's worked her way up and has always talked about kind of diversity and racial equality, and then started posting Maya Angelou quotes without attributing them. Some people were like, you can't. And then, she got into a bit of a furore because she started slagging off her cleaner on Facebook Live because, she wasn't being very nice about this woman. And all of these people that had followed her because she was real and genuine and was like them are now looking at her going, oh, I don't
not. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's because the action doesn't match up with the words. And that's really, really important. So I would say if you're running a business, because not everyone is, there are things that come to your attention and you might think, actually, we've not thought about that. That's something we need to do. That's fine. It's just making sure that in that messaging you're saying, to this point, we've not done enough. Now we're thinking about this and these are the actions we're going to take, and then making sure you're sharing that with your audience. Yeah.
What you're saying actually just completely validates what Yana put through. Hi, Yana. Good to see you.
Hi.
Another one of these lovely ladies I've met through Clubhouse, even though I also live in the same, we live in Aberdeenshire. So hi, Yana. So she's saying, being thorough about the way you communicate and act. I would also add making sure it's aligned, that they look like each other, what you're communicating and the way you're acting, that they look like each other. I think that is what we mean when we talk about being genuine and being authentic. You don't want to be saying one thing and doing something else.
Oh
People
my goodness,
are
yeah.
ready to call you out on that now more than ever before, and people are looking out for this kind of misalignment.
Yeah, and I think also, I work in the world of brand and marketing and PR. And when we talk about brand values and the feeling that a brand gives you, people think you're just being really like busty because that's the kind of job you do, right? But it matters.
Yeah.
And it matters to consumers. And the age group that are moving through who are going to become your consumers are going to care more and more and more. So your brand values, when we talk about your values, those are things that explain how you do things.
Yeah.
And it's not something you should be putting on a mug or printing on your office wall or, putting on a poster. It actually has to be how you do things, and they should be a sense check. So if you're a brand or a business and one of your values is, we give everybody a voice at the table,
Yeah.
and then you look around the table and everybody looks like you need to be
That's not everybody, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. And that's fine. Lots of businesses are like that, but it's about what you do next. When you recognize that, what you're going to do next. And then communicating that in a way that explains how you got there as well. We thought about our values and we did a sense check and we realized we're not aligned, and now we're going to do something different.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. So anyone kind of listening and having some thoughts around this, or you're working with a business that maybe could really do with looking more deeply into this, do feel free to follow Jacqui on LinkedIn. I'm sure she'll be happy to get messages and questions around the stuff that she's doing, for leaders around this. So we've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to kind of talk about that link between the internal comms and the, I suppose, external PR piece, right? So we've talked a lot about the internal stuff. We talked about values and leadership and influencing people and walking the talk. When it now comes to the messages that you're telling to the public, how do you make sure that is authentic? And what is, I suppose, a newsworthy story that will mirror those messages that you want people to know about your business without obviously, exaggerating or being in danger of not being authentic, if that makes sense?
I just love your questions. All your questions are really good. I love these. So I think the first thing, when we talk about PR, I think people have a bit of a confused view about PR. So when we think PR, we think press and advertising. So lots of people think Mad Men. they think of that. When they think PR, they think of like ad agencies in the 60s and everyone's with a whiskey and a cigar, and I wish that was my life, but that is not what we do all day, sadly. But PR, if we think about it, is about managing reputation. It's part of that is media relations, so how you interact with the press, how you create those relationships, how you create really amazing newsworthy stories, how you share your story with them in a way that would make them want to share it to their wider audiences. But it can also be things like podcasting. It can also be things like events. It can also be things like influencer marketing. Anything where you're starting to build a reputation and you're trying to widen the relationship you have with the public relations. It can be your CSR, which a lot of companies do really badly because they don't line it back to what they do. If you're a bank, why are you painting a school fence? Go and teach them about taxes. Like, come on, guys. We need to think about CSR that makes sense for our businesses. Anyway, I could do a whole live.
We need another live for that one.
But I think that when we then think about it as building those relationships with the public, and as a business, building relationships with partners that can help us do that. So whether that's through a podcast, whether that's through an event, whether that's through an industry body, whether that's through the press, then it kind of widens up our idea of what we think when we think public relations. But if we're talking specifically about sharing, like, for example, with the media, I would say that your team need to be media trained if you're going to be putting them in front of a camera. That's less about understanding not to wear a jangly bracelet or something that looks like this on the telly, although that's important, but also more about just understanding how to build a message and hold that message in your head while you're being interviewed. And that's a really important skill, and a skill that's transferable for leaders across all their communications. But, I really want anyone that we work with who's going to be stood in front of a TV camera or in front of a radio mic to feel like they know why they're there and what the objective is and how to have that great conversation. In terms of being transparent and authentic with the press, I think that sharing a newsworthy story, what you were just saying there, I think we have to reframe what we think newsworthy is. And this is about putting yourself in the shoes of the media that you're dealing with. So you want to make, as a business, the job for that journalist as easy as possible, so that they think, yeah, this is an amazing thing that we really have to talk about. And that's about it being topical. That's about it speaking to the audience that they are specifically speaking to. You know, very often we'll be working with people who will say, oh, we just want a press release about this thing we're doing. And it's like, why would a journalist share that? So really it's thinking about, for me now, especially when we're working with corporate businesses, we're talking about what are the things that you can talk about that other people can't? What things do you have in your head? Where are you a thought leader? How can your business add value for that audience? What can you share that might be really useful or really, really topical or really, really insightful for them, and start there? Because that is more authentic, because it's what they're passionate about and interested in, but it's also going to make a much better story when you pass it on, because it's not just like, we did this event, guys, or whatever it is that you're putting in a press release.
Yeah, that's such a good tip. Thanks for that. Hi, Jock. He's agreeing with the things we've been saying. You know, be you, people buy from people. So we always say that people buy from people. I think sometimes we're in danger in a business setting to just see the business as like a logo or an establishment, and forget that actually there are humans behind that. There are people there that have emotions, have experiences, have backgrounds, you know, and ultimately what you're doing with communication, whether it's internally or externally, is that you're talking to someone and you're trying to connect to them, because the more they understand you and resonate with the things you're saying, the more likely they are to want to do business with you, which is part of the PR piece, isn't it? It's that relatable story.
100%. And I think, you know, there's so much noise around personal brand, and I am not a fan of that as a thing. I think that's something that us marketers made up to sell people stuff, if I'm being honest. But a brand is a vehicle that gets your audience to feel a certain way about your product or service, right? That's what a brand is. That is the thing that they're going to connect to, that's going to get them to feel something so that they trust you and buy from you, whatever it is that you're selling. So this idea then that a person has to have a personal brand doesn't make sense to me, because we're all individual people anyway and have our own personalities. Yeah. I think when people have businesses where they are an owner-operator, or they founded a business, or they're running a business that they started, very often at the beginning, it is about you. Because there aren't as many staff, or you've not built a big enough team, or it becomes about your views on things. And that can be, for some businesses, exactly the right thing. But for some businesses, it can then become difficult as they grow, if that is the goal, to grow, because then that person has to try and segregate themselves from the brand they're building. So I would always say, you know, if you're in a position, and I take Blot, for example. So I founded this business. We've got a team. But we're kind of 18 months in to running this agency. So for the last year, the face of it has been me. And it's only really in the last 6 months that we've started really talking to the team about, okay, we're going to have to start putting other faces out there, other people out there, because it can't be me all the time. Because as the business scales, I have other things I need to be doing. And also then there's value in that when it is then me, there's a different kind of feeling to that. But that's important, I think, as well, to think about in your business, especially if you're an owner operator, are you reliant on that person, or are you building a brand that person sells on? Because if it's all about that one person, if that one person isn't there, it could be really, really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you raise a really good point, and one that we've reflected on as a business. But obviously, myself and my co-founder Sarah Downs, we started the business, and it was us, and there was a lot of, I suppose we say personal brand. I think everyone has a personal brand because you have one. It's just whether you're feeding it and you're conscious of it, or
you, right?
It's you. Yeah, by existing, you are a brand basically. And we've had that whole journey of, okay, it's us at the forefront, and kind of we're the leaders, and most people would come to us because they know us type thing, and then that evolving, and now we've built a team, and there's 7 of us, and it's putting other people, in front, and and trying not to be like the actual just face of the brand, because at the end of the day, this is a company that has other people, they have skills, they have hopes and dreams as well. So it's been, quite an interesting kind of balance, and one that I think every leader needs to be mindful of. Just exactly the questions that you were posing, Jacqui. Think about, where's this business going? What do you want for this company in the next few years? And using that to create a strategy around how you communicate and what you communicate. We've got a great comment from David that I thought was a good one to maybe round up with. The leadership at the top must appreciate their influence on the brand by what they say or do in their organization and their impact on others. I actually think not enough leaders realize how much impact they have over their brand, and how the things that they say affect their organization. Can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, maybe it's a mix of self-awareness or just not an understanding around how leadership impacts, a whole company's brand. Jacqui, what have you found?
So I think that this goes back to, what do we think leadership is? And, there are people that manage businesses. That doesn't mean you're a leader. There are people in incredibly senior positions in organizations who've never spoken to any of their team because they're head down in a boardroom. There are people that are incredibly technical and very skilled at the thing they do, have no interest in the wider strategy of the business, but are more senior because they're great at that thing, right? So leadership can be multifaceted. I think, and obviously I'm incredibly biased, but I think that communication is the number one skill of a leader. And when we're talking about influence is about what are those things called? Do you know those little pendulums with the balls?
Pendulum, yeah.
You drop one and it knocks, and then it knocks the other one. When I think of influence, that's what I think of. That cradle, Newton's cradle, that's what it's called.
There you go.
Because when you lift up that one ball on the end and you drop it, that's you communicating as a leader. The ripple through the rest of those balls that knocks the other one off the other end, that's the influence. So when we're communicating in leadership positions, we shouldn't just be thinking about the people we're talking to that are in front of us, but we're thinking about the ripple effect that that's going to cause. And that's exactly what David's saying here, that you can then have an influence on a brand. So if, for example, and I've got a good example of this, Protein World, I don't know if anyone remembers, they did an advert, 2015, I want to say, are you Beachbody ready? And it was all over the London Underground. It was this like beautiful woman in a bikini. Are you Beachbody ready? And they sell protein shakes. And there was a backlash.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Every woman in the country was like, thanks very much. I'm going to wear a bikini, even though the woman was beautiful, but it's not her fault she was on the advert. But there was this massive backlash because they read the room really badly. They didn't really understand the rising body positivity movement. They obviously had no women on their ad team. I don't know what happened. But anyway, it didn't go down very well. And Sadiq Khan ended up removing them. It was banned. It was taken off all of the London Underground advertising. Oh, wow. And Dove then released this massive campaign saying that everyone was Beachbody ready. And they ended up getting loads of publicity off the back of it because it was just on brand. They nailed it. They just got the vibe.
Timely.
Exactly. They just got it right. And it was really well done, very clever. The guy that ran Protein World, when somebody said, oh, this hasn't gone very well, has it? Basically was just like, well, this is what we did. If you don't like it, made some horrific comments about women's bodies, about eating disorder survivors, all these awful things.
Wow.
Haven't really heard about Protein World much in the news since then, have you? And this is the thing. He obviously wasn't a very nice man. So he was creating a culture in that business where nobody around him saw that that was so far away from what the market wanted. Yeah. And his influence was seeping through that company. That then meant their communications not good. And then their reaction to those communications, when they didn't go well, even worse. And it was very clear. So I completely agree with what David's saying there. As a leader, whether it is something as big as that, or whether it's the case of your team saying, you know, the team in the office going, oh, we don't really know what's going on. We don't feel like people are visible. And the boss walks in every day, doesn't say hello to anyone, walks in the office, shuts the door. All of that is influencing people's perception of you. And how they perceive you is the reality, whether that's how your customers perceive you or how your team perceive you. And that's going to have a knock-on effect on your brand and how people feel about you and whether they want to buy from you ultimately.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. So much gold dust there, Jacqui. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for everyone who's watched today and has commented and been involved. If you're watching later as well, feel free to put comments through. Yeah. Get in touch with Jacqui, connect with her. If you are looking for any advice or PR services, it's been my pleasure to have you here, Jacqui. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.